Good evening and welcome to the first roundtable discussion on electronics recycling. And to take this conversation forward, we have with us Brian Tyler, Senior Editor, Recycling Today Media Group. Brian joined the media group in September 1997. A graduate of University of Toledo in Ohio, Tyler has been a business journalist for 30 years and brings a wealth of industry knowledge. In his current role, he works from Singapore tracking commodity pricing and gathers information on processing technologies, equipment, and emerging markets in the recycling industry. Brian, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for that kind introduction, Dr. Spaliha. Good afternoon, good evening, or good morning, everyone, depending on where you are and when you watch this session. My name is Brian Taylor, and Spaliha has let you know a little bit about what I do. It is my pleasure now to introduce 5 people who are on the front lines in providing electronics recycling services in their respective countries. Our panelists are providing service in Europe, Africa, India, the Middle East, and beyond. So we have very nice geographic representation. I will ask our panelists to introduce themselves, and before I'll get to some questions to the group to keep the conversation going. I've come up with no better system than to go alphabetically by first name. Thus, I'll ask Adrian, of the Hinckley Group, to please start us off. Adrian, welcome, and please do unmute and let us know a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Hello, yes, good morning, good afternoon. My name is Adrian Clues. I'm the Managing Director of Hinckley Recycling. So we were the first government-approved e-waste recycler in Nigeria. We set up in 2016. We were initially put in funding from ourselves, and also we received some funding from DEG KFW to really kickstart things. So we've come on a long way since then, and we're really excited to be here today. Thank you very much.
That's terrific. Thank you for the introduction, Adrian. And we'll go to the other person with the first name of the letter A, Ashk Jain of, it might be NAMO, it might be e-waste. I will let him correct my pronunciation. Ashk, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Brian. Hi, good evening from India. My name is Akshay Jain, and I lead a company called Namo E-Waste Management Limited. So we are into electronic waste recycling since 2015, but it has been a journey of around 10 years because a lot of work that we had put into the R&D. It took us a lot of time to set up something in India because this concept was alien, and still there is a lack of awareness in the country about the proper disposal of e-waste. So we have been able to tap about 30 states. India is a big country with a lot of cultural differences. And, you know, like it's the fastest growing consumer electronic market as well. So because of that, the rate of generation was very high, and it was supposed to be a big problem for India. So right now we are just in the process of where we are formalizing recycling in the country, and we are playing a very crucial role in that. So currently we process about 50 metric tons of e-waste every day across 3 different plants across the country. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Ashk. I will next go to Neil Reed in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Neil, would you let us know a little bit about what you're doing?
Hi there. Hello, everybody. And thank you very much, Brian. Thank you for the introduction. As Brian said, my name's Neil Reed, and I'm the Waste Electronics and Equipment Senior Operations Manager at Halul Recycling in Jeddah 3 Industrial City. Halul Recycling was formed in 2014 as a joint venture, as a private company, and we've progressed to the point of opening up 3 facilities within Saudi Arabia. Obviously, a huge potential market. Previous to this, to joining Halul here, I worked for Sims Recycling Group. I'm sure a lot of you know those guys, and worked all around the world, Australia, Europe, and at several operations in the UK. I'm really pleased to be here as well. Thank you.
Very good. Thanks very much, Neil, for that summary. Next up will be Tia Kleinmad. I will let her correct that probably poor pronunciation. She joins us from Fairphone, a company with a very distinct niche in the industry. Could you please tell us a little more?
Yes, thanks, Brian. So my name is Tia Kleinmad, and I'm Fairphone's circular material change innovator. So short introduction of Fairphone. Fairphone is a smartphone manufacturer with the goal to change the electronics industry from the inside out. So that means that we create awareness in the industry on the problems that are present there, and that we prove that it can be done differently. And then we motivate the industry to follow us and in producing more sustainable electronics. And one of our focus areas there is circularity, which is my field of expertise in Fairphone's Impact Innovation team.
Outstanding. Thank you, Tia. And last but by no means least, by any yardstick that I can think of, comes Dr. Thomas Papagiorgio. He is with Animet Recycling Industry based in Greece. And he also, I don't think will mind also being classified as a bit of an ambassador from the Bureau of International Recycling. He's held some prominent roles with that organization. Thomas, could you please tell us a little bit about what you've been up to lately?
Yeah, good afternoon from Greece as well. I mean, Animet is a metal processor. It's part of the biggest metallurgical group in the country. We deal with more than 250, close to 300,000 tons of metal scrap per year. Within the streams that we deal with is mostly electrical and not electronic equipment, in the sense that white goods, for example, are feed for our shredders. But since in Europe, electrical and electronic equipment is treated within the same legislative framework, for many years we were also processing electronic equipment. Now we mostly trade with this waste stream. And with my role as compliance manager of Animet, I've been following this waste streams for years. I still do. And during this process, till last year, I was also chairing the e-scrap committee of the Bureau of International Recycling, and I'm still part of this committee.
Terrific. Thank you very much. I think I would like to start again by going around person to person, with each person answering this question to the way they see it from their perspective, in part because we do have folks positioned in very different places. And I would like to ask, measured by perhaps volume and by awareness, how would you describe the state of electronics recycling where you are? And Tia, when we get to you, maybe we'll talk specifically about mobile phones, but I just think I'd like a general sense. It's late 2021. We've been talking about this issue globally for a long time. How do you think we're doing, or you're doing in your locale, your location, with electronics recycling right now? And I guess that means that, Adrian, I'll ask about Nigeria first.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. I mean, Nigeria is probably one of the largest economies in Africa, and one of the biggest producers of e-waste. So I think it's estimated, although data is not always the most reliable, but Nigeria generates over 200,000 tons of e-waste per annum. But we're one of a few formal actors in the market who actually ensure that the hazardous material is processed correctly. But 98% of the material still goes through the informal channels, and it never gets to me, right? So it follows the supply chain. It follows the informal sector from households, from companies, and sees its way either into an informal crude recycling practice or being exported. So volumes for the formal recycling sector are poor, but volumes in country are high. So we have a problem which we need to solve. So we need to be looking at more formal take back options, and obviously getting more support from the government to ensure that enforcement is best as it can be.
Thank you very much. I'll turn now go to India, where I suspect some of the challenges might be similar, but I also should not take that for granted. So Ashk, what can you tell us from India?
Yeah, Brian, I think a similar situation we have it in India as well, what Adrian said. There is a lot of spillage into the informal sector, but one thing that the government has done great for the country for e-waste is that they've introduced the extended producer laws, which were there in 140 countries before it came to India. And India came out with the EPR management laws in 2016. So it has been 5 years, and that process is getting implemented. So I think the groundwork is now done. And also there is a mass contribution from the people as well. So people who are aware, they're willing to come up and contribute to the activity of waste disposal in the right manner. So I think the groundwork has been laid in India. Yes, there's still a huge role of informal sector which is there, but we are coming across those challenges because the government is really strict on implementing those laws and they're coming after the producers. So after the monetization of the whole process, which is now coming from the producers, so India has seen a huge surge in capacities. It has almost been 20 times in last more than 20 times in last 5 years. So this has been an extent, but still formal recycling in an ethical manner. I think we are still a little far from that day, but slowly getting there.
Okay, thank you very much for that update. From India, Neil, I suspect you're in Saudi Arabia specifically to help answer this question. So what can you tell us about what's happening in that kingdom?
Well, again, I can ally myself with Adrian, really, pretty much what he said there. On a high level sort of perspective, Saudi Arabia being the largest country in the GCC, and I think 2 million square kilometers of area, 31 million people combined, and a huge GDP. But from the WEEE perspective, I mean, I think we're producing around 400,000 tons. Again, larger than that is white goods, but the horizons from that are a huge potential. We're seeing, looking at the data, and again, agreeing with Adrian, we're not really sure on the accuracy of the data because the producers themselves are not necessarily in the country because the distributors are moving the material out, and we're not getting a great deal of feedback on what's coming back in. So the numbers are quite sketchy. They're based on sales figures. I think for 2021, we're seeing around 260,000 tons of category 1 to 4 being sold in Saudi Arabia. So we're trying to calculate those horizons out of those. But again, it's the informal market that dominates us hugely. The lack of regulation, and again, agreeing with Adrian, the lack of enforcement for what there is. We have infrastructure challenges and cultural aspects as well, which is new to me. So to be fair, we are in the embryonic stage with it all, and that's why I'm here. There are some very good initiatives being generated by the government with the forming of SIRC, the Saudi Investment Recycling Company. They're looking to acquire or integrate and work with private partners. You have the new Ministry for Waste, MOAN. They're now coordinating all the environmental aspects of it and looking at the licensing part of it. And I'm sure that we're going to transition into ATFs, authorized treatment facilities in the future. But currently, we do have a challenge.
Understood. Thank you, Neil. Teal, what Fairphone is doing sounds like it's addressing an issue that's certainly gotten a lot of attention, and that is the circularity or perceived lack of circularity with smartphones. They seem to be, so many of them are made in South China. From there, they go out to the rest of the world. And well, I think as you even mentioned, a lot of them just end up in drawers or they end up in the informal sector, as has been mentioned. But what can you tell me? How do you perceive the state of mobile phone and tablet recycling right now, and how can that be addressed?
Yeah, so in general, we in Europe are the ones that rank first in e-waste collection, but unfortunately also the first ones in e-waste generation. So actually every person is generating 16 kilogram e-waste per year. So that's quite a lot. And of course, smartphones are just a small part of it. But because smartphones have a very fast replacement cycle, we estimate that there are around 700 million of smartphones laying around in European drawers, because they are so small that they are not really disturbing in the everyday life of people, but they contain more than 50 different materials, and also the valuable materials and even also critical materials. So they are very valuable to get back into the cycle, but often it's not necessarily perceived as adding a lot to recycling. So people don't really feel this responsibility of returning them, and also often have concerns in terms of data protection, or if they still work, that they could keep them as a backup. But they are actually very important to bring back into the loop. And this is also something what Fairphone focuses at, because we want these resources to be reused, but we prioritize there also that the smartphones are, if possible, reused before they get recycled, because we have to keep the value of the resources at the highest level possible for as long as possible. But in the end, of course, it will always end in recycling, because every electronic product becomes e-waste at its end of life.
Yes, thank you for that summary of the issue with smartphones. We now turn to Thomas, and Thomas, we welcome an interview. If you have an overview for all of Europe, we'd love to hear it. If you'd like to concentrate on Greece in particular, that too is fine. But how do you see the state of electronics recycling right now in 2021?
Well, I mean, as far as the sensitivity of the public is concerned, or the government, I mean, Europe is probably the best way to be. I mean, circular economy here is probably the hottest topic, or the hottest issue at the moment. But on the other hand, I think we've reached the point where we have to be very careful. As I said, the sensitivity is there, but maybe we're going in a way of over-regulation. I mean, apart from the relevant directives, let's say, governing waste, electrical and electronic equipment in Europe, there are standards that the companies need to follow. The material is characterized as waste, which means that it goes under specific rules, and there are already discussions about, let's say, maybe banning exports of waste or restricting waste, let's say, transport. I mean, these are issues which affect the industry, and we need to be careful. The fact that in Europe, electrical and electronic equipment actually are treated together, I mean, it requires for a company a lot of energy to deal with all this stuff. The investments are huge, and you know, we will reach a point where maybe there's not too much space, especially for small and medium enterprises in the area. You know, when you consider the energy required, when you consider the regulations that you have to deal with, when you consider the restrictions you have to deal with, I think, you know, we need to step back a little bit, you know, see what's going on, and try to make the best out of this. I hope that actually we're not already over this point. Let's say that we have more burdens than, let's say, benefits, but definitely we need to rethink the whole issue about the treatment of WEEE in Europe.
Thank you very much for that overview. I think I've heard the term informal and informal sector. It does seem to arise when one starts talking about global conditions for e-scrap. And one of the first questions we've had coming from a viewer or a listener is relating to that. And I think this person phrased the question, I'll more or less rephrase it a little, but what are any of you doing, or what are any of the governments involved where you live doing to try to close this gap or meet somewhere in the middle between the informal sector and a more formal, highly regulated sector? You know, in any of your locales, do you see that? Do you see any way of these two sectors working together in the next 5-10 years and having less of this outright sort of unsafe, somewhat corrupt, perhaps informal sector versus the capital intensive, you know, the formal sector that we tend to think is doing it the right way? Who's closing the gap? Who can tell me, you know, a strategy maybe that you see emerging? I'll take a raise of a hand and I'll call on anyone who, okay, we'll start with Neil. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Brian. Yeah, I think, to be perfectly honest, I think for the next few years, we will need to work with the informals. because they have such a actually very organized network of procuring this material through connections, through just their historical presence in the market. But some of our ideas have extended to that the authorities try to develop authorized treatment facilities, and we take these people under the umbrella so that we basically try to cascade down the best practices and work with them over it definitely would be a long term, because these people, unfortunately, they basically work for sustenance. Some of these guys make a very good profit, but they're generally led by, I won't go so far as to say a mafia style, but they're a very organized type of informal business market. So these guys on the ground are not the guys to be attacking. They're the ones doing the heavy lifting, so to speak. But I think going forward, we have to integrate. We have to raise awareness. We have to really do it with a soft touch, because they do make a service. Although it's bad practice, it can be detrimental. If we didn't have them, then we'd be in a worse situation. So it's definitely a case of having to work with them. That's certainly how we see it. And we're going to come, especially with the authorities here in Saudi, they're coming from the top down. So eventually they will improve the layers above these people to cut off these supplies. Because even the businesses that are not regulated to dispose of their e-waste accordingly in the right way are auctioning it off to these people. Okay, so that they look at these e-waste not as a liability, but more as a revenue generator. It's the end of its life. How much is it worth? Why do you want it? If you want it, it must be worth something. So pay me. So and we see, especially, the origins of all the material comes from the same places across the world: consumer, enterprise, government, pretty much. But the disposal channels are the challenge for us. And they tend to go to the landfill, scrapyards, brokers and traders, and auctions. And ultimately, the majority of it ends up being shipped overseas to other markets. So,
I see.
Yeah.
Thanks, Neil. Thomas, did you wave your hand? Please, Thomas.
Yes,
Thomas, Papa Giorgio. Yeah.
I mean,
yes.
Okay, dealing with the informal sector is something that at least the industry cannot do it alone, and I'm not thinking now of, let's say, policing measures or something like that, of course lie with the government. I think that it is also an issue of a more flexible, let's say, framework of operation. Because even if you find the informal sector, or if you would like, let's say, to try and communicate and try to initiate some business with them, okay? I mean, for example, tax-wise, they are not existing, okay? So any kind of negotiation or any kind of, let's say, business between the formal and the informal sector would require a more flexible, let's say, framework of operation, because as things are now, it is practically impossible, let's say, to talk to this people.
Mm. And it looks like SK also has a comment, and Tia as well. We'll start with SK.
I think we have adopted a similar model in India, where we have formalized these people. So they are good at collection, and we are just telling them that, you can sell it to us at a price which is convenient for you. You don't have to really process it yourself. So they are doing their job, the informal sector, in which they're collecting it from the doorsteps of the consumers and then bringing it to the formalized units. This could only happen after the introduction of extended producer responsibility norms. So, and we are getting them into the taxable structure. So as a part of a producer responsibility organization, which we are, we were the first company in India to be registered as a producer responsibility organization for e-waste recycling, collection and recycling. So as a part of your responsibility as a PRO, you have to formalize these aggregators, and we are filing their returns, making them accountable for every transaction. They're giving us proofs of organic collection, that we have to check as an organization which is helping the producers. So I think all of that is being done. And yes, I am one of the people who has seen that change and, the entire thing, how it has happened in the country. So right now, India has, earlier 95% was going to the informal sector. And right now it's about 85%. So we have really, added that extra 10-15% of formalized recycling through these initiatives, only by the amalgamation of informal and formal sector.
Very good. Thanks, HK. Tia, I think you also had a hand up.
Yes. So this is also one of the issues in the electronics industry that Fairphone has identified, and our approach to that is always that we don't try to avoid working with people that are often seen as an issue in the industry, but that we actually see it as an opportunity to improve something there, because it is really millions of people that are dependent on this work in the informal sector. And right now, this is of course very polluting activity, and at the same time also very health-wise hazardous for the people that work in there. And what we did so far is that because it is a reality that e-waste gets exported, and of course also smartphones get exported either illegally or as secondhand products to countries where the e-waste is later on processed mostly in the informal sector, that we collaborate with a partner of us called Closing the Loop. And we use basically the people from the informal sector to collect phones, and then we ship them back to Europe for responsible recycling, so that the livelihood for the people still remains in place, but the recycling process is less polluting. But of course, this is just an intermediate step. This cannot be the solution for always, because we need to rather create structures that the value creation stays in the countries. And this is actually something where we are researching into right now. So what is the role if a manufacturer wants to take responsibility for the products that we create and the e-waste that is created? Yeah, and so we are right now learning on this point. And yeah, we are happy if anyone here or someone from your viewers has an idea on that. So we are always happy to discuss those topics, because we really want to engage there more in the future as well.
I see. Thank you, Tia. And I think we have a question from someone observing this session about the true circularity of some of the things that are turned in, and we'll get to that maybe just a little bit later. I first want to see if Adrian had a comment on this topic as well, on the informal sector.
Yeah, no, it's a great topic. This is really interesting because, extended producer responsibility is the way forward. Definitely, we need to engage the informal sector. And the only way to truly engage the informal sector is by financial incentives. There is no other way. So it's about paying the right price for the material. And if you can do that, they will give it to you. There's been some really interesting studies with GIZ in Ghana that prove that out. The challenge that we have with EPR systems, or what I see the challenge with it, is the definition of who the producers are. So it's who takes responsibility and who pays into that system, because more often than not, the producer is the importer of record. And that can be anybody. I can be a producer. If I import electronics into Nigeria, I fall into that category. And suddenly you open up a very large number of stakeholders, and the waters get a little bit muddy. Then you're relying on people reporting how much electronics they're bringing in. The data is not really very accurate. We know that the border is very porous. Customs data is not always the best. I much rather see the OEMs themselves be identified as the producer, the manufacturer, the Dells, the Samsungs. These guys who are used to dealing with EPR systems have the capability and the business interests to be part of that system, and let them pay into the system. I'd be interested to ask Ashke at some point on, how they manage the finances in India. Where do they pay to? Who's in charge of that? Because that's a really key role, and having kind of a black box in place to ensure that it's done fairly is really critical in countries that may have issues. And many countries around the world have that issue of corruption, and making sure that that doesn't impact how the EPR system operates, and then going to also TEA and Closing the Loop. I think it's really interesting what they do. We also work with Closing the Loop, and we're one of their recyclers in Nigeria. So they have a kind of compensation scheme where, as they're selling a product, they're also receiving funds from the sale of the new product to take back devices in places like Nigeria. So that's also a really nice model alternative to the EPR scheme, kind of one-for-one compensation scheme, which is working well.
Terrific. Thanks, Adrian. We have a question that seems to be specifically for Akshay, but I think I may circulate it to the group as well, because this person wants to know what percentage of materials, once you've done some disassembling and broken things down and reuse what you can reuse, what percentage of materials might still need to go overseas and can't really be closed in a nearby loop? I think that is an interesting question, because certainly Basel Convention often looks at it as, well, we don't want things traveling from OECD countries to the non-OECD countries, but what about a non-OECD country that maybe has some material that it really can't, it doesn't have the right smelter or the right process for it? Does that happen in India?
This has been a problem for us, because export was restricted. It has been like that for about 3 years, where government are not giving any new licenses to the people for export of PCBs. So this is only in the case of precious metal recovery, which is for PCBs and your processors and all those expensive material. But right now, there are some homegrown technologies which are coming up. There are Indian scientists. So we have developed that technology locally with the Ministry of Electronics, and we are the first industrial partner for it. In that process, we are able to extract gold and silver and copper at a good efficiency. So, the whole objective of the government to restrict the import and export of e-waste is just because they don't want the value to go out of the country, as this is a huge resource for all those metals. So because of that conscious effort, the government has forced the industries to set up the precious metal recovery units. They're encouraging it with little subsidies as well on the capital investment. And I think soon India will come to a stage where there will be no need absolutely to send any PCB abroad for metal extraction.
See, thank you. Thank you very much. Would anyone else like to comment about the geography of a closed loop? Does it have to be nearby? Are we sometimes too focused on that? Thomas, I'll ask. You've got your hand raised, please.
Well, I mean, I think that it's not a straightforward answer. I mean, of course, it has to be nearby if the transport of the material, let's say, is very probable to cause, let's say, some pollution or any kind of environmental hazard. But on the other hand, I think, I mean, when we talk about cyclical economy, I think that it's much easier to materialize this in a global scale rather than having cycles, let's say, in local scale that do not touch each other. An example I can think of is of, let's say, electrical or electronic equipment, which is of no use currently in Europe after repair, for example, because technology has moved forward, society has moved forward, let's say. They have no more use for this stuff, even if they are repaired. Okay, and maybe also for the industry, it's also not interesting, let's say, or it becomes too expensive, let's say, to deal with their repair. For such kind of materials, which might be of use, on the other hand, in other parts of the world, it could make sense, let's say, to allow for the transport there for further use. If we cut these channels of communication, these global channels of communication, I think that, troubles may arise in the sense that materials, for example, that could be reused, let's say, when they stay in a local market, they end up in the best, let's say, case to be recycled rather than reused.
Very good. I guess I'll maybe also bring the conversation over to Adrian, because I suspect that's a question that has to be asked in Nigeria as well. There's plenty of scrap on the ground, and does it get to a point where export containers have to be filled and some of the PCBs or other things have to leave the country again?
Yeah, that's probably the biggest challenge we have at the minute is there's a lot of collection, but there's very little capacity to treat any of the, the waste streams. So whether it be PCBs, whether it be, batteries, there is no downstream option locally, right? And there's no nearby option. Hinkley was the first company to export lithium-ion batteries out of the country in line with the Basel Convention. And it was a pain in the neck. It was really difficult, so how many companies are going to take that on? Not many. With lithium-ion batteries in particular, you're exporting drums filled with sand, so it really, there's no economic sense in it. It's loss-making 100%. And then coupled with the fact that a lot of the prices of material in the market, so even PCBs, are really inflated. So if you wanted to run a business model of buying PCBs and exporting them out, you would struggle because there's some seriously big Asian buyers who are buying in huge quantities, and it's kind of difficult to compete with that. So there's little incentive to open up the capacity to do it locally. And until that incentives are there, you just won't see it. But it's needed. I think, from a green jobs perspective and from an economy point of view, there's a great opportunity there for Nigeria. The way I always put it is that, all this waste is coming into the country, a lot of it illegally. Secondhand goods from Europe, like Germany and UK, ship a lot of waste into Nigeria. All the real waste and hazardous material is dumped and left behind, and all the value is exported out of the country. So we're kind of left with all the waste, and all the value is gone. So that needs to change, and local capacity building needs to take place. But before those investment happens, there needs to be incentives for those investors.
Thank you, Adrian, for that summary. There is, I believe, an entire discussion a little bit later today on batteries, but we've had a question about batteries, and we've had them mentioned once already by Adrian as well. So it kind of makes me want to go over to Tia and ask her about the Fairphone circular model and concerning batteries. What is the model you see that might work so that these smartphone batteries can end up with a circular outcome versus sitting in a drawer or whatever else becomes of them, which is not always the right outcome?
Yeah, so what we do right now is that we take back our phones, including the battery, but we also offer battery spare parts, so it's very easy to replace the batteries in our phones. Yeah, of course, everything what we take back as Fairphone is responsibly recycled in Europe. But we also conducted a pilot also with Closing the Loop in 2020. We published a report on this. Also, what we just heard about this shipment of batteries from an African country to Europe, exactly in these buckets of sand that were just described, to check if there is a business case behind it or not, and to prove that this is possible. So so we work on that area, but also for the input which goes into the battery. So we are looking into into fair materials that go into the batteries as well. But in this case, currently we don't focus on recycled materials, but on fair cobalt, which is mined in a fair way in Congo. So there we focus on the fair mined material as opposed to the recycled input.
Thank you very much. We've got a few minutes left, and a topic I think that comes to mind because it's in today's news or this week's news is that we've got world leaders meeting up in Glasgow, trying to make sure the world knows that sustainability is an issue, that emissions are an issue, and they take private jets to get there apparently. But I guess that leads me to ask, in terms of the nations where you're all operating, to what extent has that message seemed to move all the way down through society? Do you think that most of the households, most of the small enterprise and business owners, are they aware that when they get to the end of life of a computer, a laptop, a television, that it should have some sort of sustainable circular outcome? And I would like for everyone to take on this question, so I can either pick someone to go first or if someone wants to raise their hand and go first, and what the folks who are your potential customers, how many of them are eager customers and are ready to turn in their recyclable electronics? I'll pick on India because it has the most people. So actually, if you could go first on this one.
Yes. So firstly, in India, we do have a great second-hand market. I think 90% of the IT material is being refurbished. Demand for that. So that's one. But as the awareness is spreading out, people are looking for alternative solutions, not just when it comes to waste disposal, but for alternate energy sources as well. Solar power has been, immensely increasing in India in the last 5-7 years. It has seen a huge potential. And similar things are happening in other sectors as well. In general, if I give you an idea, on a very basic note, that people have stopped using plastic bags. So even if they're going out for shopping, they would rather carry a cloth bag or a paper bag and just to get their stuff. So there is a general awareness about the hazards of plastic, hazards of wasting the resources, and that is, I think, that is where our government should also be credited, because as when Modi the government came, this was 2015, they came out with a pan-India initiative which was called Swachh Bharat Mission, which is to clean India. Throughout, clean the streets, clean and general habits of waste disposal were also elaborated in that. So I think our government should be given a huge amount of credit, and certainly the awareness has increased in India about sustainability.
All right, terrific. I will ask maybe for one of our European participants to let me know how they think that direction is going in the European Union. Go ahead, Thomas, please.
I mean, in general, I would say that, I think Europe leads the way. I mean, everybody's looking to what Europe is doing in terms of, let's say, legislation, for example, for electronic scrap. And, the public is very sensitive on the issue. They even look, not only to what happens after the end of life of a specific, let's say, instrument. Now, when they even go buying stuff, they look at the labels and try to pick up something which is energy effective, for example. Maybe in the future, we have some ratings also for recyclability, the same way that we have some ratings for energy consumption. So I would say that in Europe, I mean, things look good compared to the rest of the world, I would say. On the other hand, of course, the Europeans, they are exposed to the latest trends of, let's say, technology, which means that maybe they are not so much in reuse, but they support recycling at least. And of course, okay, there are parts of Europe where actually, things can certainly improve. If you look, let's say, to the north and to the south, there is kind of an imbalance, let's say, in terms of the performance of the countries, as far as landfilling is concerned, recycling, waste to energy, and all this kind of stuff. But I would say, generally, Europe is probably, let's say, one of the good places as far as performance of the continent and sensitivity of the people is concerned.
Thanks very much for that overview. We've had a couple of late questions come in, and so in our last 5 minutes, I may want to switch topics, and because the late questions have to do with toxics or hazards involved in what you do for a living, and it's something we haven't talked about yet, but it's one of those things that certainly can be a disincentive, and it can be a reason for more involvement of regulation. So it's hard to avoid the topic, but I see the term POPs, I see mercury mentioned. So I guess maybe I'll pick on Neil first, because he's kind of had to help set up a facility that has to probably deal with these things. How does that factor in the future of this kind of processing? Is it the reason why you think there's a person like you might think there should be some more EPR, some more producer responsibility? And does it make the industry so capital intensive for that reason? What do you do about the toxics and the hazards?
Well, coming from the West, coming from Europe and being exposed to the regulations, I came into Saudi Arabia in it. Now I look at myself as being completely naive, because I came with the same expectations and the same perspectives of what was being enforced in the UK and in Europe at the time. But of course here, there was nothing. In 2013, that's what we were faced with. So building on that, obviously the business that we set up here was about the focus materials, was looking for the lead, the batteries, the mercury containing vapor tubes, all the hazardous, the toner cartridges. And we've built our business on that. What we've learned in dealing with those items, and again, as Adrian has mentioned, there is no downstream vendors available to process these. One of the upsides that we've encountered was that lead acid batteries are a revenue stream for us. They were always a negative revenue as far as we were concerned back in the West. But here we find them that they're a profitable revenue stream. There's a very good recycling market that is developed and recovery of the lead on that basis. Lithium ion, big problem. Mercury vapor tubes, again. So we're having to stockpile at the moment. Okay, it's not in great quantities, but now we've just, there are lithium ion recyclers being established here. And the good thing is the 2030 vision that has been sent down by Mohammed bin Salman obviously pushes towards a stronger environmental presence here in Saudi. So that's having some positive effects, but definitely is a challenge for us because the third-party processing, even finding the third-party processes, is quite a significant challenge here for us. But that's our responsibility. That's why we're here, and we're not going to shy away from that. And we're going to continue to pave the way, principally in Saudi Arabia and the Middle East, for this business.
Very good. Thank you, Neil. I think before I turn this over to Dr. Sfaliha to close out this session, I might ask Adrian to give us a closing comment, because I think Nigeria is a place that its activists and journalists will go in there and they'll say, there's some problems here, including toxics. So what is the update for Nigeria? How much can one company do, and what is left to be done in Nigeria to handle these sorts of toxic streams that either the rest of us send there or that the population generates itself?
Yeah, as I mentioned, as far as AFRA is concerned, Nigeria's got to be one of the focal points. It's one of the largest markets. Unfortunately, it's also one of the largest markets for dumping of e-waste, particularly from Europe. Europe's getting a lot of things right, but unfortunately, there's a few things that they're not getting right, and that is this illegal export of secondhand e-waste to African countries. And Nigeria is right up there as one of the receivers of that. But look, that also creates opportunities, and there is a huge unemployment problem in the country. There's a very large young population who are present looking for means to earn a living, and so based on that, if we can embrace this sector and work with the informal to try and formalize them, which I'm a big believer in, trying to work with them to try and expand this green economy, if you like, in the country, while working hand in hand with the government and OEMs to try and implement EPR practices. If we can nail that, then you will see recyclers like Hinckley. You're going to see 10, 20 of us all wanting to operate there. If you have an EPR system, you have good tonnage, then it's a no-brainer. We're going to see the market mature and become more developed. So I think India is obviously clearly a good roadmap for us. I think Nigeria, we need to look towards India. So maybe we need to speak to Akshay and get some of the politicians on board and kind of use that as a roadmap. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. We need to look at what's worked. And I think there's quite a lot of similarities between countries like India and other countries in Africa. And we need to learn from those. So yeah, I think the future's looking bright, it's looking green, and hopefully Hinkley will be playing a key role in that.
Thank you very much, Adrian. Those are very good. I think they're going to serve as closing comments, and I think appropriately so, because it provides a little bit of optimism amongst the many challenges. I would like to thank all 5 panelists for terrific contributions. This 40 minutes went very fast. I quite frankly could keep talking, I think, with you folks for quite a long time, but that is not how this is structured. So I guess that gives us a reason to maybe have one of these roundtables again fairly soon. There is more programming to come, and so I'm going to thank our speakers. And I will say that I think I hope to cross paths with all of you in the future. I think there's some good stories to tell, what you're all doing. And I thank you for joining this panel. Thank you very much. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.